Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life crime stories that reveal what truly happens behind prison walls. Every story here is based on real events, and tonight's one is going to chill you to the bone. This is the torture wing. At least, that's what inmates at Louisiana's Angola Prison called it. A hidden cell block where men were taken for disciplinary isolation and never seen again. Guards whispered about it under their breath. Prisoners feared even saying its name. No official documents mentioned such a place, but everyone inside knew. Once you were sent there, you were gone. On a cold night in November 2001, an inmate named Ronald Brooks was dragged down that hallway, his hands cuffed behind his back. His face was swollen and bloodied. He had been accused of attacking a guard, something he swore he never did. "Please," Ronald gasped, his voice echoing off the walls. "I didn't do nothing. Please, man." But the officers said nothing. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, muttered, "You should have thought about that before you ran your mouth." The door at the end of the hall creaked open. Ronald saw only darkness beyond it. A faint humming sound, like a generator, came from inside. The guard pushed him forward, and the heavy metal door slammed shut behind them. That was the last time anyone saw Ronald Brooks alive. The next morning, his name was quietly erased from the prison roster. No body, no report, nothing. When other inmates asked about him, they were told he'd been transferred, but no one ever found out where. Weeks later, whispers started spreading through the prison yard that men were being taken to a sealed-off part of the facility, somewhere deep underground. One inmate claimed he heard screams coming through the vents at night. Another said he saw a guard carrying a black trash bag that looked too heavy for just trash. Then one day, another man vanished. His name was Jerome Carter, and he had been Ronald's cellmate. He was the one who kept asking questions, the one who didn't stop talking about Ronald's disappearance. The night before Jerome vanished, he told another inmate, "I'm getting out soon, and when I do, I'm telling the world what's going on here." He never made it out. By morning, his bunk was empty. The guard said he'd been moved for his own safety. But inside Angola, the rumor was different. Jerome had been taken to the wing. And this time, someone said they saw it happen. An older inmate named Frankie Dorsey later told investigators that he saw Jerome being led away by two guards at around 2 a.m. They had black gloves on, Frankie said. One was carrying a plastic bag. Jerome was crying. He kept saying, "Please don't take me down there." When Frankie said "down there," detectives asked what he meant. His answer was chilling. "The basement," he whispered. "They got a whole part of this prison nobody's supposed to know about." The moment those words left his mouth, Frankie disappeared too. The next morning, his cell was empty, just like Ronald's, just like Jerome's. His personal items were gone. His name was removed from the record system. And for years, no one on the outside knew any of this was happening. Angola Prison remained one of the most secretive correctional facilities in the United States, until one young journalist stumbled across something she was never supposed to see. Her name was Lydia Hart, and she had just received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside was a small, faded photograph, one that appeared to show a long hallway lined with locked cell doors deep underground. Scrawled on the back, in shaky handwriting, were just 4 words. "Find them before midnight." Lydia didn't know it yet, but that envelope would lead her straight into the same darkness that had swallowed Ronald Brooks and the others. The rain was pouring that night when Lydia Hart parked her old gray Honda outside Angola Prison's front gate. Her windshield wipers screeched back and forth, struggling against the storm. The envelope she'd received 3 days earlier sat on the passenger seat, damp at the edges from being handled too many times. She stared at the photo again. The long, dim hallway, the same pattern of lights, the same narrow doors. Something about it felt too real, too recent. She could almost hear the echoes from inside that place. Lydia was only 27, a freelance journalist for Baton Rouge, but she'd built her reputation writing about police abuse cases. This, however, felt different, more dangerous. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Just get what you need and get out." Inside the prison's front office, the air smelled of bleach and damp paper. A guard in a dark green uniform sat behind a glass partition, chewing gum lazily. His name tag read Wells. "Evening," Lydia said, trying to sound calm. "I'm with the Baton Weekly. I'm doing a piece on prison reforms. I sent in a request last week to tour the facility." The guard squinted at her ID badge, then picked up a phone. "Yeah, I got some reporter here. Name's Hart." He paused. "Right. Okay." He hung up and said flatly, "Warden'll see you in 10. As Lydia waited, she couldn't help but notice a bulletin board behind the desk. On it were several sheets of paper marked Inmate Transfer Approved. The dates looked old, most from the late 1990s and early 2000s. But the names caught her eye: Ronald Brooks, Jerome Carter, and Frankie Dorsey. She froze. Those were the same names she'd seen mentioned in the anonymous letter that came with the photograph. Someone had written them in blue ink, followed by the words, "They never left." "Miss Hart." The warden's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He was a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes. His nameplate read Warden Douglas Shaw. He forced a tight smile. "Follow me." The tour began like any other. He showed her the cell blocks, the cafeteria, the yard. Everything seemed ordinary, at least on the surface. But Lydia noticed something odd. Every hallway she was led down had a number: A block, C block, D north. But one corridor near the back had no marking at all. Its lights were dimmer, and the walls seemed older, like part of a forgotten wing. "What's down there?" she asked, pointing. The warden's expression didn't change, but his tone did. "That area is sealed off. Maintenance issues." He turned sharply and led her in the opposite direction. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She sat in her small motel room just outside the prison gates, typing notes in her laptop while thunder rolled outside. Her screen glowed with the names she'd copied from the bulletin board: Brooks, Carter, Dorsey. She searched the Louisiana Department of Corrections database for their transfer records. Nothing. It was as if they'd been erased completely. Then, at exactly 12:07 a.m., she heard a faint ding. A new email had arrived. No sender, no subject line, only a single attachment, a short, blurry video clip. The video showed a narrow hallway, the same one from the photograph. The camera was shaky, like someone recording secretly. Lydia could hear heavy breathing and footsteps echoing. Then suddenly, a man's voice whispered, "They're still here, all of them." Before she could replay it, the file vanished from her computer. Deleted. Gone. Her heart raced. She tried tracing the email, but the address didn't exist. It was as if it came from nowhere. She sat back, trembling. Someone inside that prison had just reached out to her. The next morning, Lydia returned to Angola, this time pretending to have lost her press pass so she could slip in with a group of visiting contractors. She stayed quiet, wearing a hard hat and a bright yellow vest, moving through the halls with the workers. When the others turned to unload tools, Lydia broke off and hurried down the unmarked corridor. The air grew colder with every step. Paint peeled from the walls. She could hear the faint hum of machinery somewhere below. At the end of the hall stood a rusted metal door. No sign, no number, just a keypad lock blinking red. Her heart pounded as she reached out to touch it. Suddenly, a voice behind her said, "You shouldn't be here." She spun around and froze. It was one of the guards from the day before, the tall one with the shaved head. The same one from the old reports, the one who dragged Ronald Brooks into the dark 20 years ago. He took a step closer, his eyes cold and expressionless. "You need to leave, Miss Hart. Now." Lydia tried to speak, but no words came out. Her hands trembled. She glanced past him, just for a second, and saw that the keypad light had turned green. Someone had just unlocked the door from the inside. Before she could react, it creaked open. A wave of cold air rushed out, and the faint sound of breathing. The guard turned, startled. Lydia's instincts kicked in. She reached for her phone to record, but the light inside the doorway flickered, revealing what looked like a hand reaching out from the darkness. She gasped. The guard cursed under his breath, slamming the door shut so hard the walls shook. He grabbed Lydia by the arm. "You didn't see anything. Do you understand?" Her voice quivered. "What was that? Who's in there?" He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, almost like a warning to himself, "They never left." Lydia's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. The guard's grip tightened on her arm, as he dragged her away from the locked door. His fingers dug in her skin, his jaw clenched like he was holding back anger or fear. "Please," Lydia said breathlessly. "Just tell me what's going on down there." He didn't answer. They walked in silence down the cold corridor, their footsteps echoing off the walls. When they turned the corner, he finally spoke, his voice low and shaky. "You shouldn't have come here, Miss Hart. That place isn't for visitors." "But someone's down there," she insisted. "I saw." "You saw nothing." His tone snapped sharp. "Forget what you think you saw if you know what's good for you." He stopped suddenly and turned to face her. His name tag caught the light, S. Moore. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They looked tired, scared. "I've been here 15 years, he said quietly. "I've seen things that don't make sense. You think people just disappear in this place? You think those files just vanish for no reason?" "Then help me," Lydia pleaded. "Tell me what's happening in there." He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "If I talk, I'm next. You don't understand how deep this goes." Before Lydia could press further, a voice crackled over his radio. "Moore, report to B-Wing. Now." He froze, eyes darting toward the small speaker on his shoulder. "They're watching," he muttered under his breath. "They always are." He leaned close to her ear. "If you want answers, check the old tunnels under the chapel." That's where it started. Then just like that, he was gone, walking briskly down the hall, disappearing around the corner. Lydia stood there trembling, his words echoing in her mind. The old tunnels under the chapel. That night, she returned to her motel and sat on the bed, recording everything into her voice memo app before she forgot the details. Her voice shook as she spoke. Day 3, Angola Prison. Guard identified as S. Moore mentioned tunnels under the chapel. Possible connection to missing inmates. Saw a hand, or what looked like one, reaching from a sealed door in the restricted corridor. Door open from inside. Someone's alive down there. She stopped the recording, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and tired. "What are you getting yourself into?" she whispered. Outside, the rain started again, tapping against the window. She couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., she heard a soft noise, a faint thud from outside her motel door. Slowly, she got up and peeked through the curtain. A dark car sat parked across the street. The engine was running, headlights off. She could just make out 2 figures inside, watching. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A new message. No contact name. Just one line. "You're asking the wrong questions." Her stomach dropped. The next morning, Lydia drove straight to the old chapel inside Angola's outer perimeter. The building looked ancient, with boarded-up windows and vines crawling up the brick walls. A faded sign above the entrance read St. Michael's Chapel, EST 1942. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Wooden pews were broken, and sunlight spilled through cracks in the ceiling. She stepped carefully, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. Behind the altar, she found a metal grate half hidden under a pile of olden books. She knelt and tugged at it until it came loose with a rusty creak. Beneath, it was a narrow staircase leading into darkness. "Old tunnels," she whispered. Moore hadn't been lying. She switched on her flashlight and started down the steps. The air grew colder, damp with the smell of mildew, and something else, something faintly metallic like blood. Her shoes splashed softly as she reached the bottom. The tunnel stretched ahead, lined with old bricks and rusted pipes. She followed the sound of dripping water until she reached a door, thick, iron, and chained shut. There were scratch marks on the wall beside it, words carved into the brick by hand. She leaned closer, heart racing. The letters spelled out, "Help US. We're still here." Lydia staggered back, nearly dropping her flashlight. A sudden noise made her freeze, the sound of boots echoing down the tunnel behind her. Someone else was down there. She switched off her light and pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. The footsteps got louder. A beam of light swept across the tunnel. Searching, a deep voice said, "She went this way." 2 men. Guards. Lydia's mind raced. She had to hide. She slipped into a side alcove, crouching behind a row of old crates. Her phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number. "Get out now. They know." Her throat tightened. She peeked out. The guards were almost at the door. One of them was carrying a small metal box with wires. "What's that for?" the other asked. "Orders from Shaw," he replied. "They said no trace." He knelt and started setting the box down by the iron door, right next to the carvings. Lydia realized what it was: an explosive. Her hand flew to her mouth. They were going to seal the tunnel with her still inside. She took a step back, but her foot brushed against a loose pipe, making a faint clang. Both guards turned instantly. "Hey, who's there?" Their flashlights swung toward her hiding spot. Lydia's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. She turned and ran. The tunnel echoed with shouts and the pounding of boots. Behind her, one of the guards yelled into his radio. "We got her. She's in the south shaft." Lydia sprinted blindly through the darkness, her flashlight bouncing wildly. The air seemed to close in around her, every breath shallow and panicked. Then, a sudden blast of cold air hit her face. She saw a narrow opening ahead, maybe another exit. She ran faster, her lungs burning. But just as she reached the end of the tunnel, she heard a deep click from behind, the sound of a detonator. She turned, eyes wide, and whispered, "Oh my God!" And then, the blast tore through the tunnel like thunder. A deafening roar filled the air as concrete and dust exploded around Lydia, throwing her to the ground. Her flashlight flew from her hand, spinning across the floor before the beam flickered out completely. Everything went silent, except for the ringing in her ears. Her lungs burned as she coughed through the smoke. The tunnel behind her had collapsed into rubble. If she hadn't run those last few steps, she would have been buried alive. Chunks of rock still crumbled from the ceiling as she crawled forward, gasping for breath. The explosion had sealed the way she came, but a faint draft of air brushed against her face, a sign there was still an opening ahead. She pulled herself toward it, her palms raw and bleeding. The air grew colder, damper. When she finally reached a small gap in the wall, she squeezed through, scraping her shoulder against the jagged edge. On the other side was a narrow chamber, darker than the tunnels above. Her flashlight was gone, but a faint blue light glowed from somewhere deeper inside. She followed it slowly, heart pounding with each step. The light was coming from an old electrical box mounted on the wall, still humming faintly with power. Wires ran from it along the ceiling, vanishing into the dark. Below it stood a heavy steel door with a grated window, the kind used for solitary cells. Lydia stepped closer and peered through the grate. At first, she saw nothing but shadows. Then movement. Something shifted in the corner, a hand, pale and trembling, reaching toward the small opening. She gasped softly, stumbling back. "Oh my God!" A weak voice came from the darkness inside the cell. "Help me, please." Her heart broke. "Who are you?" The figure moved closer, and as the light from the control box flickered, she saw a face. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, a long, graying beard. The man looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. "My name's," he coughed hard, barely able to speak. "Brooks. Ronald Brooks." Lydia's stomach dropped. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You disappeared over 20 years ago." He tried to smile, but it came out as a painful grimace. "They said no one would ever find me." She grabbed the bars, her hands shaking. "What is this place?" He looked past her, fear flashing in his eyes. "You need to leave. They'll come back. They always come back." "Who?" "The guards." He nodded weakly. "The ones who run the wing. They do tests. On us. Electric shocks, no food, no light. Said they were studying behavior under isolation. But it's torture. It's always been torture." Lydia's breath quickened. She reached for her phone, still in her pocket, miraculously unbroken. She started recording. "Ronald, I'm going to get you out of here. I'll tell the world." But before she could say another word, heavy footsteps echoed down the far end of the tunnel. Voices. Flashlights. "They're coming," Ronald whispered. "Hi." Lydia looked around frantically. There was nowhere to go but behind a rusted metal cabinet leaning against the wall. She slipped behind it just as beams of light flashed into the chamber. 2 guards entered, the same men who planted the explosive. Their uniforms were smeared with dust, their their faces hard and silent. One of them was holding a clipboard. "Subject still alive," one said flatly. "Warden wants it finished tonight." The other man unhooked a key ring from his belt and stepped toward Ronald's cell. Lydia covered her mouth to keep from gasping. "No, please," Ronald begged weakly. "You said it was over. You said—" The guard cut him off with a glare. "You should have stayed quiet." He unlocked the door, and the hinges groaned. Lydia's hands shook so badly, she almost dropped her phone. The recording was still running. As they stepped inside, she could barely see what was happening, just shadows moving and the sound of Ronald crying out. Then, a loud electric buzz filled the air, followed by a thud. Her eyes filled with tears. When the buzzing stopped, one guard muttered, "He's gone." The other replied coldly, "Bag him. Warden doesn't want another mess." Lydia's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The men dragged Ronald's limp body out of the cell and down another corridor Lydia hadn't seen before, a hidden passage that sloped downward, deeper underground. As soon as their footsteps faded, she stepped out from behind the cabinet, her phone clutched to her chest. The recording was still on, the red light blinking faintly. Her hands trembled as she looked into the empty cell. Ronald Brooks was gone. She took one shaky breath, whispering to herself, "You're not dying down here, too." She followed the path where the guards had gone, careful not to make a sound. The corridor twisted sharply, the floor slick with water. The faint sound of voices echoed ahead. One of them was unmistakable. "Warden Shaw." Lydia crept closer, crouching behind a large pipe. She could see through a crack in the wall. A small room filled with monitors, old filing cabinets, and medical tables. On one of the screens, live video feeds showed several small, windowless rooms. Inside them, figures sat slumped against the walls, thin, weak, unmoving. There were at least 5 of them. She covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The missing inmates, all of them, were still there. Warden Shaw's voice echoed coldly through the room. "This project stays buried. Do you hear me? No one ever finds out what we did here. Ever." A guard replied. "What about the reporter?" Shaw paused. Then, in a low voice that sent a chill through her spine, said, "She won't make it out of Angola alive." Lydia's body froze. She knew she couldn't stay there any longer. Quietly, she turned to run back the way she came, but as she reached the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. Standing there, blocking her path, was Gardmore. He stared at her, his flashlight shining directly into her face. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered. Lydia's pulse thundered in her ears. "You told me to find the tunnels. You helped me. I didn't think you'd make it this far." His expression was torn, fear and guilt mixing on his face. "Now they'll kill you too." "Then help me stop them," Lydia pleaded. "People are still alive down there." Moore looked past her toward the sounds of Shaw's voice in the distance, then back at her. His jaw tightened. "You have 5 minutes to get out before the next sweep. Take the side tunnel by the pipes. It leads to the old generator room. There's an exit shaft there." He pressed something in her hand, a small metal key. "You'll need this." "Moore, what about you?" He hesitated. "Someone's got to buy you time." Before Lydia could say another word, he turned and walked straight toward the voices. Moments later, she heard shouting. Then gunfire. The walls shook again, dust raining from the ceiling as alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed through the tunnel. Lydia sprinted through the side passage, gripping the key tightly in her hand, every heartbeat echoing louder than the sirens. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Not yet. Because the truth about the torture wing was finally coming to light, and someone inside Angola Prison was willing to die to make sure it got out. The alarms blared through the tunnels like screams. Red lights flashed across the damp concrete walls as Lydia ran, clutching the key and her phone. Her chest ached, her legs burned, but she didn't stop. Not now. Somewhere behind her, the echoes of gunfire still rang. Gardmore's voice replayed in her head. "Someone's got to buy you time." She stumbled through the narrow passage, using the key to unlock a heavy door marked generator access. Inside, old machinery hummed faintly, covered in dust and cobwebs. Pipes hissed overhead, leaking bursts of steam into the cold air. Come on, she whispered to herself, scanning the walls for an exit. Then she saw it, a rusted ladder leading upward to a circular hatch. The sirens were getting louder. She stuffed the phone inside her jacket, grabbed the ladder, and began climbing. Every rung shook under her weight, but she kept going until she reached the hatch. It wouldn't budge. She pushed harder, using all her strength. Then, with a metallic screech, it gave way, and rain poured in from above. Lydia pulled herself through, collapsing onto the wet grass outside. The storm had returned, lightning flashing across the Louisiana sky. She lay there for a moment, gasping, letting the rain wash away the grime and blood. Behind her, the faint glow of Angola Prison loomed in the distance, cold, silent, and enormous. She had made it out, but she wasn't free yet. She grabbed her phone and pressed play on the recording she'd captured. Ronald Brooks' weak voice filled the air. "Help me, please. My name's Ronald Brooks." Then came the electric buzz, the shouting, the voices of the guards, everything she needed. Proof. Her hands trembled as she uploaded the file. She didn't care who saw it first. The media, the FBI, the world. Someone had to. A loading bar appeared on the screen. Uploading 72%. She looked up, scanning the dark highway that stretched beyond the prison fence. Headlights appeared in the distance. 2 black SUVs speeding toward the field. "No, no, no," she whispered, clutching the phone tighter. 82%, 91%, 99%. The vehicles stopped just short of the field. Armed men jumped out, flashlights slicing through the rain. Lydia sprinted into the trees, branches slapping her face as she ran. The phone buzzed in her hand. Upload complete. Her heart leapt. It was done. She hid behind a fallen log, breathing hard, watching as the men searched the area. One of them shouted, "We lost her. Find that phone." But it was too late. The video had already been sent to every major news outlet and uploaded to her backup drive. For the first time in 24 hours, Lydia allowed herself to breathe. She looked up at the rain and whispered, "You're free now, Ronald." By morning, the video was everywhere. News anchors replayed the footage over and over. The trembling voice of Ronald Brooks, the guard's cruelty, the proof of the torture wing. The Department of Justice launched an investigation. Angola Prison was placed under federal review. Warden Shaw was arrested within days, his face plastered across every screen in America. And guard Samuel Moore, the man who'd risked everything to help her, was never found. His name was later added to the list of those who disappeared inside the prison. Months later, Lydia stood outside the old chapel, now surrounded by yellow caution tape. The morning sun was warm, and the air was still. A small memorial stood near the entrance, flowers, candles, and a plaque with the words, "For those who vanished but were never forgotten." She placed a small cross at the base of the plaque and whispered, "You can rest now." Her phone buzzed again. This time, a new message from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "It's not over." Lydia froze, staring at the screen. Then she looked up at the prison beyond the fence. Somewhere deep inside those walls, a light flickered. Just once. Then it went dark. She turned away, the rain beginning to fall again. The story wasn't finished, but the truth had finally been set free. Movie camera. If you were moved by this real-life story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with others, and subscribe for more chilling true crime stories based on real events. Every click helps us keep uncovering the truth behind the headlines, one story at a time.